Get out of my office right now! The entire precinct froze as Chief Reynolds slammed his fist on the desk, his face burning red with fury. You think you can just waltz in here demanding answers? You're nothing but a washed-up kid who got lucky, he growled. Detective Jordan Harris stood firm, his jaw clenched. Lucky? Jordan scoffed. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for that cop who saved me 10 years ago, and I know you're hiding the truth. Reynolds' smirk faltered for just a second before he regained his composure. You have no idea what you're messing with, Harris. Drop this case or you'll regret it. Jordan took a step closer, his eyes locked onto the chief's. You can threaten me all you want, he said coldly, but I will find out what really happened that night. What happens next? You won't believe the shocking truth that's about to be uncovered. The heavy rain pounded against the city streets, turning the sidewalks into slick rivers of filth. The air smelled of gasoline, damp concrete, and the faint trace of something burnt lingering in the cold wind. Detective Jordan Harris gripped the steering wheel of his old dented sedan as he sat across from the towering police precinct, its neon sign flickering in the storm. He'd been here 1,000 times before, but tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't here as an officer. He was here for answers. His hands clenched into fists as memories clawed their way back, memories of that night 10 years ago. The night his father, an honorable cop, had disappeared without a trace. They told him it was an accident, a simple case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But deep down, Jordan knew they were lying. His mother, broken beyond repair, had spent years searching for justice, only to be met with dead ends and forced silence. And when Jordan followed in his father's footsteps and joined the force, he quickly learned that certain questions weren't meant to be asked. Until now. Jordan exhaled sharply and grabbed the manila folder on the passenger seat. Confidential documents he wasn't supposed to have. The evidence inside, enough to ruin careers, enough to tear apart the department from the inside out, enough to get him killed. But he wasn't turning back. Shoving the car door open, he stepped into the downpour, his trench coat doing little to keep him dry. The moment he entered the precinct, the warmth of the fluorescent lights did nothing to ease the ice crawling up his spine. Detective Harris? A young officer at the front desk looked up in confusion. Jordan didn't answer. He didn't have time for small talk. He marched straight to the chief's office, shoving open the heavy oak door without knocking. "Get out of my office right now!" Chief Reynolds was already standing, his eyes blazing with fury. The entire room seemed to shrink under the weight of his rage. Jordan shut the door behind him, stepping forward without hesitation. "You told me my father died in a random mugging," he said, his voice cold and unwavering. He tossed the folder onto the chief's desk. That was a lie. Reynolds' jaw tightened, but he didn't break eye contact. "You need to watch your tone, detective." Jordan took another step closer, his hands steady, but his heart was pounding. "You covered it up," he continued. "You knew exactly what happened to him, didn't you?" Reynolds scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Harris." "Drop this. Now." Jordan's eyes darkened. "I can't." For a split second, something flickered across Reynolds' face. Panic, maybe even regret. But then it was gone, replaced by a smirk that sent a chill down Jordan's spine. "Then I guess I'll have to teach you what happens to people who don't listen." The door suddenly burst open. 2 officers stepped in, hands on their holsters. Jordan barely had time to react before Reynolds nodded toward them. "Arrest him!" Jordan's breath was ragged as the 2 officers closed in on him, hands resting on their holsters. His instincts screamed at him to move, but every nerve in his body was paralyzed by the weight of what was happening. Chief Reynolds leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You really thought you could walk in here, throw a few accusations around, and walk out unharmed?" he sneered. Jordan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Every fiber of his being wanted to fight, to resist, but he was outnumbered. He forced himself to stay calm, think. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice measured. "If you arrest me now, people will ask questions." Reynolds scoffed. "People only ask questions when they care. And believe me, Harris, no one cares about you." One of the officers, a burly man with a shaved head, stepped closer. Jordan could see the sweat glistening on his temple. He wasn't nervous, just eager. "Detective Harris, you are under arrest for—" Crash! A loud bang echoed through the hallway outside. The officers whipped their heads toward the door, hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. Jordan didn't hesitate. In a single motion, he grabbed the nearest officer's wrist, twisting it violently. The man yelped, his gun slipping from his grasp. Jordan slammed his elbow into the officer's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Before the second officer could react, Jordan spun, yanking the first officer's gun from the floor. He aimed it straight at Reynolds. "Don't move!" he barked. The chief's smirk finally faltered. "You're making a big mistake, Harris." Jordan's finger tightened on the trigger. "No, you made the mistake. You thought you could cover this up forever. You thought I'd just let it go." Reynolds' eyes flicked toward the door. Jordan knew backup would be coming. He had seconds, maybe less. "I don't have time for speeches," Jordan growled. "Where is my father's file?" Reynolds remained silent. Jordan took a step closer, the barrel of the gun mere inches from the chief's face. "You know what I've realized, Chief?" Jordan's voice was steady now, cold. "You're afraid." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "You should be." The chief chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You're a dead man walking, Harris." Jordan heard the unmistakable click of a safety being turned off. Behind him, "Damn it," a voice rang out. "Drop the gun, detective." Jordan's heart pounded as he turned his head slightly. Another officer had entered, his weapon trained on Jordan's back. He was surrounded. Reynolds slowly stood up, brushing imaginary dust off his suit. "Game over, Harris." For a moment, silence thickened the air. Then Jordan exhaled. "Not yet." Boom. An explosion rattled the building, shaking the walls and shattering the glass window behind Reynolds. The lights flickered. Sirens blared. Jordan didn't waste the opportunity. He moved like lightning, grabbing the closest chair and hurling it at the officer behind him. The man barely had time to react before Jordan was sprinting toward the door. Gunfire erupted, bullets slamming into desks and walls. Jordan dove, rolling across the floor before disappearing into the hallway. He didn't stop, didn't look back, because now there was only one way out. And if he was right, the truth wasn't buried. It was waiting to be found. Jordan's breath was heavy as he sprinted through the dark alleyways, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The distant sound of sirens faded into the night, but he knew better than to think it was over. The entire police department was hunting him, but he had something they didn't: the truth. He ducked behind an abandoned car, his hands trembling as he pulled the small flash drive from his pocket. The evidence he risked everything to retrieve. The proof that his father had been framed, that the corruption ran deeper than he had ever imagined. Jordan exhaled, gripping the drive tightly. It felt small, almost insignificant in his palm, yet he knew it carried enough weight to destroy an empire, if he could get it into the right hands. A sharp voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're out of time, Harris." Jordan froze. Chief Reynolds stood at the end of the alley, his silhouette illuminated by the glow of a street lamp. Behind him, several officers emerged, their guns drawn. Jordan's fingers tightened around the flash drive. He could feel the sweat pooling at the back of his neck, but he forced himself to meet Reynolds' gaze. "You're done, Chief." His voice was steady, defiant. "This changes everything." Reynolds chuckled, shaking his head. "You think anyone will believe you? You're a fugitive, a disgraced cop. Who's going to listen to you?" Jordan didn't flinch. He knew Reynolds was trying to break him, to make him doubt himself. But he wasn't the same man he had been yesterday. With slow, deliberate movements, Jordan lifted his phone and turned the screen toward Reynolds. The red live indicator flashed. "Maybe they will," Jordan said, his voice laced with steel. Reynolds' smirk faltered. The realization dawned on him like a death sentence. He had walked right into Jordan's trap. Thousands of people were watching. Every word Reynolds had just spoken, every threat, every lie. It was all being broadcasted live. The officers behind Reynolds hesitated. One by one, their guns lowered as the weight of the moment sank in. Jordan saw the flicker of fear in the chief's eyes. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the back wall, cameras flashing as the judge's gavel struck the desk. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court finds Chief Reynolds guilty of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jordan sat in the front row, his hands clenched into fists. He had fought too hard for this moment. And now, watching Reynolds being led away in handcuffs, he finally felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. A voice beside him made him turn. "You did it, son." Jordan's throat tightened as he met his father's gaze. The man who had spent years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit now sat beside him, a free man. For the first time in his life, Jordan felt the weight of justice tip in the right direction. His father smiled. "Your mother would be proud." Jordan swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "This isn't over," he murmured. "There are more like Reynolds, more corruption, more injustice. Someone has to stop them." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then I guess you know what you have to do." Jordan took a deep breath. He did. He had spent his life searching for the truth. Now he was ready to fight for it. What would you have done in Jordan's place? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping stories. Comment below. Do you believe justice always wins?